Good evening, and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott, and tonight we'll once again be delving back into politics. There are elections coming in March of next year, and our guest tonight is a candidate for the U.S. Congress in the 7th Congressional District, Thomas Day. Thomas, thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure to be here, Kevin.
So let me ask you, in today's topsy-turvy, seemingly horribly twisted world of Washington, why on earth would anyone want to go there?
Well, I get that question a lot. Why do this? Why go to Washington? Why get yourself kind of caught up in that morass that we see going on there? And my answer to them is simple. We do have a U.S. Congress. It needs to function. It needs to function better. And with a Congress with a 90% disapproval rating, and we usually see that.
Or higher.
Yeah. I mean, every single survey of the American people asking, how do you feel about the current U.S. Congress? We never see an approval rating really above 15%. So, what's a great way of fixing that? I would suggest maybe not re-electing the same people over and over again.
But now let me ask you, you are a Democrat and will be running the Democratic primary in March. The Republicans have been on record as saying that you remember back in President Obama's first term, Mitch McConnell famously said that his highest legislative priority was making sure that the president did not get reelected.
Yes.
Instead of anything having to do with the welfare of the country, it was strictly partisan politics in the most raw and obstructionist sense. So what is it that you, as a freshman congressman, could bring to that situation, one of only 435 representatives, to break through that?
Well, I am an Iraq War veteran. I served in 2003 and 2004 in Iraq for the Army's 101st Airborne Division. I served 5 years in the U.S. military. What I can tell you is that I am not a career politician. This is my first. This is my first candidacy for any public office. I am coming at this with a fresh perspective. I don't know the rules of Washington in the way that Mitch McConnell described with that infamous quote that was his top legislative priorities. I'm going to Washington. I'm trying to go to Washington to serve the people of the 7th District. This district has a 15% unemployment rate. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go talk to the people of Oak Park, River Forest, in the Loop, in Austin, and Inglewood, and River North, all of the unique, diverse neighborhoods of this district, and explain how I am going to serve this district, this community, and help it become the economic engine of the Midwest that I know we are capable of being.
So what are some of those ways that could happen?
So this district has lost a number of jobs in manufacturing. I think we need to focus on what Chicago has always done best, and that's manufacturing. We have a tremendous manufacturing base here in the 7th District and throughout Chicago. We have the workers. We have the job training programs like at Daly College. We have centers of entrepreneurship. I come from 1871. It's a tech co-working space at the 12th floor of Merchandise Mart. A friend of mine runs a co-working space called Catalyze Chicago. They focus on advanced manufacturing startups that manufacture physical products. We have everything we need in the 7th Congressional District and throughout the city of Chicago and the Chicagoland area to put people back to work doing manufacturing.
So what can you do in Washington, though, that would help that, specifically for the 7th District or for Chicago generally? What can you do in Washington that might spur that here locally?
So two things. What I'm going to do is, listen, a job of a congressman is not simply to be a vote. I think that's been misunderstood. We elect people to go to Congress to lead their districts. So each and every month, I'm going to convene an economic development commission, and I'm going to bring together the unions, I'm going to bring together small business owners, I'm going to bring together other local elected officials, and convene a conversation every month. We're going to start in January 2017. We're going to have another conversation in February 2017.
Same people?
In March.
Different people?
Well, we can add a few as they come. But every month we're going to meet and we're going to design a strategy on how we can put people back to work. That is a job. That is the convening function of that a congressman should be doing in this district, and that's what I'm committed to doing when I'm elected. Second point, we have a number of legislative priorities in this district that I don't think are being represented, particularly in job training programs. We have 30,000 job openings that we can't fill at the moment because employers can't find qualified applicants to fill these positions. We need more federal support for programs like at Daly College I mentioned. They do training in advanced manufacturing. We need to make more investments like what I see at Goose Island, DMDII, the Digital Manufacturing Design Innovation Institute. It's a manufacturing research laboratory. It's not in the 7th Congressional District. It's a couple blocks to the west. But
it's a model which could be used.
Absolutely. That's absolutely a model. And I think more investments and more advocates for places like DMDII, for places like Catalyze Chicago, a representative that advocates for programs and places like this, I think that could be a tremendous magnet for more manufacturing jobs to come back to Chicago.
So a lot of this, it sounds as though it would be dependent on federal money to help spur these programs or create the programs. Is that how you see it?
Well, I mean, that is certainly a part of it. But I say again, what this district needs is not just a vote, not just somebody who calls it in every couple of years, not just somebody who votes the way we want. We need a leader in this district, and that's the leader that I'm committed to providing this district.
So let's segue to that for a moment, because you are running against a longtime incumbent in the Democratic primary. Congressman Davis has been in office for many years, and is, by all accounts, apparently very well liked by his voting constituency. So why did you choose this particular race against a very popular and longtime incumbent to make your foray into politics?
Well, first of all, an election to Congress is not a lifetime appointment. We see such dissatisfaction with the job that Congress is doing that it makes no sense to keep re-electing the same folks over and over again. Listen, when you re-elect the incumbent, that's your way of saying, Congress, you're doing a good job. Like it or not, that is how you say.
Even if you think your own representative, even if you're happy with what your representative is doing, you're saying that by just simply sending that incumbent back, you're blessing the current structure of Congress.
This is, I mean, if you are as viscerally dissatisfied with the job that Congress is doing, as we've seen over and over again in public opinion surveys, right. I would suggest that certainly you owe it to yourselves, if you are this dissatisfied, to explore alternatives. I have great respect for Congressman Danny Davis and his many years of service to this district. I really do. But, we can't expect leaders of, 1996. I mean, Congressman Davis was elected in 96. He's been in Chicago politics since 1979. It doesn't make sense to, elect somebody who has, really been in politics for this long to represent the people of this district into 2019 when this term would end. There have been way too many new industries, new residents, a lot of changes in the district that make this a very different district, a different city, a different region than it was in 1996 when Congressman Davis was elected.
So you've been out campaigning, you've talked to a number of the political leaders, and you've talked to voters.
Sure.
What's your sense of the reception you're getting? As you've pointed out, Congressman Davis has been in a long time.
Sure.
We know he's very popular. He usually wins by very large margins. So do you get a sense from the voting population that they feel it's time for change as well?
I do. And let me, you note that Congressman Davis has been elected, with wide margins. Listen, he has not had a challenge, frankly, a strong challenge for, depending on how you define a strong challenge, for really almost 2 decades. I'm going to provide that. There was a challenger who a veteran of the CIA. Congressman Davis challenged his ballot petition, and he didn't even get to participate in the democratic process.
It's an old Chicago tradition, by the way. Just I'm sure
Perhaps,
you know, right?
perhaps, but it's easy to get reelected with wide margins when you're going through litigation to get an opponent who has served this country kicked off the ballot. That's not going to happen to me.
Don't you expect, though, that something similar might? I mean, ballot challenges, as I say, are common practice in Chicago politics.
Perhaps.
Don't you expect that might happen in your case as well?
It might. We have a number of volunteers out getting signatures. I have one of the top attorneys in this, to handle this. We will submit many times more signatures than is required to get on the ballot. But I mean, to your point about Congressman Davis has been elected with wide margins. My response to that is that, frankly, Congressman Davis has not faced a challenge like we're going to provide for him this March.
So let's segue from the politics to the policies. There's so much happening in this country right now that are highly contentious issues. So the big one that everyone seems to be focused on, even the Republicans now have come around to focus on income inequality.
Sure.
So what can we do? Where does that fit in your view of priorities, and what things might be done in order to try to address the question?
Sure, absolutely. Well, so we are recording this at the day that Pope Francis addressed the joint session. That was a tremendously powerful moment that I hope can begin the process of catalyzing a bipartisan commitment to reducing income inequality. He was very clear about the need to reduce income inequality.
And wealth inequality, I should add.
And
two
wealth,
separate things.
absolutely. You got it. So there really needs to be a comprehensive strategy to address this. I'm for raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Nationwide. I'm for closing some of these tax loopholes that allow hedge fund managers to pay less by percentage.
The carried interest loophole.
Right. That enables them to pay less in terms of federal income taxes than their own secretaries. But let's think a little deeper about that. We need a comprehensive strategy to invest in low-income neighborhoods that allows somebody in a neighborhood like Austin to receive the same kind of opportunities as the kids in more affluent areas. We really need.
And how would that happen? I mean, how would you provide those opportunities? What can the federal government do to create tools or opportunities in Austin that might rival those in Lake Forest or Wilmette?
Absolutely. Well, so I have, in my first several weeks of this campaign, I issued a policy paper where I and try not to roll your eyes. Every politician has an 8 or 9 point plan.
My 5-point plan.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, I issued something similar where, I issued point for point, how we can end this era of mass incarceration and invest in low-income neighborhoods that could really, as I told you, provide these opportunities that we don't see in these lower-income neighborhoods now. For example, expanding the CDFI fund, the Community Development Financial Institution Fund. This is a program created in Bill Clinton's first term. It could bring potentially millions of, it already does, the CDFI fund already does provide tax credits and investments into a lot of lower income neighborhoods.
For companies that come in don't get the tax credits if they set up in these areas, right?
That's correct. Another one of Bill Clinton's pet projects in his first term was something called the Empowerment Zone program, whereby some lower income rural and urban lower income neighborhoods are identified, and for each additional hire you make in these empowerment zones, a company will get a $3,000 tax credit. I think that we should expand that to $4,000 if those hires are made in advanced industries, in tech. Call them the tech empowerment zones. And I say that because We see that in technology, in the tech industry, each job creates 5 additional jobs around that job. It's what economists call the multiplier effect. And back to the point of how can we expand economic opportunity? We have really condemned a lot of these low-income neighborhoods to a downward spiral through uneven enforcement of federal drug laws, and federal drug sentencing guidelines that have really done a great disservice to these neighborhoods.
And not to get too far afield from that, but when we're looking at economics and economic development, tax policy plays a huge role in how income and wealth essentially is distributed around the country. And right now, tax policy very heavily favors the wealthy.
Yes, it does.
And essentially penalizes the not very wealthy.
Sure.
And everyone below that.
Right.
And it highly favors corporations that can hire whole departments. In fact, you may recall a few years ago, GE, General Electric, had their most profitable division was their tax division, because it figured out how to legally, I mean, they weren't breaking the law, but how to legally avoid paying taxes. So where does that fit in? How do we get, and I'll say one more thing, another Democrat, Bernie Sanders, who has gone on record to say, you hedge fund managers, you private equity guys, you corporate CEOs, be on notice now that I'm going to make sure you pay your fair share.
Absolutely.
So how do you do that? And how do you do that from the congressional level?
Well, I mean, what Senator Sanders said is right. I'm sure the other candidates on the Democratic side would agree with a lot of his policy proposals. We need to close that carried interest loophole you mentioned. I mean, that will do that will go a long way in terms of getting more revenue from these billionaires, not millionaires, billionaires. I certainly would favor something like that. We also need to explore how we treat long-term capital gains, and maybe expanding the period of time that you get until you get long-term capital gains.
Right now it's a year, right?
That's
so
correct.
Making
Right.
It
That
sometime,
3
longer
years.
period.
Right. I mean, this is the kind of quarterly capitalism game that I think has not just done a tremendous disservice to our country, but to the businesses. I mean, you see businesses like Google, who are not so beholden to the short-term interests of shareholders. How not Google now, Alphabet has really created a culture of innovation inside their firm that is healthier for that firm. So I think as we move away from what might be called quarterly capitalism, I think when you get down to it, you're going to find a lot of businesses thinking, that really is a good thing, that we wouldn't be so beholden to kind of short-term quarterly interest.
So let me segue from that. Another topic that's very hot right now in the news is drug prices. And as you know, just recently there was the raising of the price of an drug to fight parasites in HIV and cancer patients. Went from $13.50 a pill to $750 a pill.
Right.
And what I have read on that is that this happens to have caught the public's eye, but it's not unusual.
Not at all.
And so what is it? Hillary Clinton has come out recently and said that she wants to limit the out-of-pocket expenses of all under the expanded version of the Affordable Care Act to $250 a year. So even if a pill costs $750 per pill, the most you would ever pay would be $250 a year.
Which is still too much.
So how do we approach that kind of question? What's the way to get a handle on these kinds of runaway drug prices?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, of course, we need to allow the federal government, Medicare and Medicaid, to negotiate with drug manufacturers. We currently are prohibited by law from negotiating
and that was
with
under the Bush presidency, right?
That's
George
right.
W. Bush.
That's right. Prescription drugs right now we're really kind of what economists call price takers. That is not a good idea. We certainly need to negotiate with these drug makers to make sure we can get lower prices. But let's think more broadly here. I'm a supporter of something called the American Center for Cures. This is an idea to create a federal department that would research cures funded by publicly financed bonds that would provide cures to the market that would be the domain of the American people. That would not be owned by a private entity.
The equivalent of open source software.
Anyone
could
yes,
do
absolutely,
this.
absolutely. So, what we need to do is kind of get away from this profit motivated healthcare that was so vividly illustrated with this guy who raised
Shkreli, I think
the hedge fund manager who raised
Right.
the price of an AIDS drug 800%. This is
No, 5,000%.
is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, right.
Yes.
My
Enormous.
math is
Just-
off, but
just, yeah,
right.
just unconscionable. In my view.
Unconscionable
Yeah.
is absolutely right. Yeah.
So I'm really intrigued by this. What did you call it?
The American Center for
American
Cures. You
Center
could
for
find
Cures.
more information on it at AmericanCenterForCures.org.
Because I have actually heard that idea before, and most of my background is from technology, so I think of it in terms of open source software, which is software that's not covered by copyright and anybody can use it for whatever purpose. And the idea that the government, maybe through universities or however, would fund the basic research, because the drug companies, as you know now today, talk about, well, we have to cover all of our R&D expenses, and it's so hugely expensive, which I don't dispute, and I know that clinical trials are also very expensive. But if the government were to take that on, and the government did the basic research and could farm it out to the universities, they're well set up to look at that, or could be set up with federal grants. And then, as you've mentioned, it becomes the discoveries become the property of the American people, and there is no patent on them. And then what the irony of this is, the free market would actually then take over, because since the idea of the formula, whatever it is, is in the public, then it really is true capitalism. If you can make it to FDA standards cheaper than the guy down the street, you're going to do very well, and you're going to do better than the guy down the street. So it becomes a real, honest-to-God competition. So as I say, this is an idea I have heard before, and I'm intrigued to hear that you're following something very similar, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, we haven't really cured anything in the United States since polio. I mean, we've come up with pills, we've come up with, various treatments to mitigate ailments and pains, but we haven't really cured anything. That's a shame. I mean, we have a tremendously high rate of diabetes in this district. We have a tremendously high rate of cancers. We see not really a very large decrease in fatalities from cancer since 30, 40 years ago. We're not making the kind of progress in terms of finding cures for a lot of the diseases that faces this district.
And do you think that is, like particularly in case of cancer, do you think that is a function of not having, not being able to find, cancer in particular is a very difficult disease because it's not the same from one person to the next. Would this government program, would it put more resources behind it? How would it address something as difficult as cancer?
It would certainly put more resources into it. What I would suggest is that this profit motivated healthcare system that we've had, and the president's healthcare bill did, it certainly moved things in the right direction. But again, this profit motivated system of healthcare that we saw so vividly with this hedge fund manager has failed to support the finding of cures, and that is something. And by the way, it's Mike Huckabee talked about at the last presidential debate needing to focus more on finding cures in America, and I completely support him. And by the way,
you're a Democrat, remember?
I am a Democrat. Yeah, that's probably the only thing that was said in that debate that I agree with, but. I certainly agree that we do need to focus more on cures in the American healthcare system.
So moving on, we've only got about 5 minutes left, but another major issue that's getting a lot of airtime in the presidential debates is immigration.
Yep.
We have, by any estimate, somewhere between 11 and 12 million undocumented immigrants here. Number one, is it a problem? And number two, if it is, what's the solution?
It's beyond a problem. It's a national embarrassment, our immigration system. It is putting us at a tremendous disadvantage economically.
How so?
Well, so you know, you and I, apparently you just said you came from the tech world. I do as well. We see a number of qualified entrepreneurs and innovators that cannot stay in the United States because they get kind of stuck in the muck of you know, getting work visas and you know, eventually becoming citizens. That's a shame. If you know, you are a talented entrepreneur and innovator, of course we want to see those folks stay here. We are a nation of immigrants, and the Pope talked about that today. And you know, for us to constantly be sending back folks who get trained at our universities, which are still, you know, the top in the world, it's shooting ourselves in the foot. It's unilateral disarmament, and that we have not been able to pass a comprehensive immigration bill, even though it is plainly in the national interest, it demonstrates just how dysfunctional matters have become in Congress.
Now, though, of course, Donald Trump talks about immigration from a very different perspective. He
Right.
talks about all the criminals essentially coming across from the Mexican border, and he's going to build this 1,000-mile wall. So if we step outside the tech sector, there are a lot of immigrants who don't come with a set of high-tech skills, for example.
Right.
Does your policy or does your approach address them as well, people who come over and become day laborers, for example?
Sure. Well, absolutely. I would, you know, I certainly support the president's comprehensive immigration bill. I certainly think, you know, we look at Donald Trump's rhetoric. This is outrageous. This is, you know, speaks to a Republican Party that has really kind of gone off the rails in terms of, you know, being controlled by, you know, some rather irregular extreme factions within their party, and that that Donald Trump still remains a very credible candidate for that nomination. Speaks to, frankly, an element of race in the Republican Party that I think could potentially condemn them to you know, a permanent minority status as far as the White House goes.
Well, it's certainly a political liability that they'll have
Certainly.
to contend with. But since you mentioned it yourself, it does speak, though, to a very vocal part of the Republican Party who are voters in any general election. They're voters as well. I mean, of course they are. And so how do you reach out to them? How do you reach that segment?
Well, I mean, I think, frankly, there are probably some voters inside of Donald Trump's camp that I never will be able to reach out to. However, you know, this district, while being overwhelmingly Democratic, I think we all recognize that. You know, there are a lot of independent-minded Democrats, Republicans, and just independents. I have gone to a lot of voters and said, you know, I'm a Democrat, but I am open to a number of ideas from every side of the aisle, and you know, I'm always open to speaking to Republicans and independents, and you know, making sure while I might not agree with you know, you on some issues, you know, I'm certainly open to these conversations, and you know, I'm not running to represent just the Democratic Party in Washington. I'm running to represent the entire 7th District, and that's what I'm committed to doing.
I can't think of a better way to wrap it up.
Thank you.
Thomas, thank you so much for being here. It's been
Pleasure.
a pleasure.
Thank you.
So I'll remind our audience, the primary is a few months away. It's March 15th. That's the Democratic primary. Thomas Day is running for the 7th United States Congressional District. So thank you for joining us once again. This is Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. You can find us on Comcast Channel 19 every Saturday night at 8 and on the web at publicperspective.tv. So till next time, thank you and good night.